Welcome, dear guests of the Filmfest Hamburg. I have the pleasure to welcome Luis Lopez Carrasco, the director of The Year of the Discovery. It's great to have you here at the Filmfest Hamburg and speak with you about your film. Welcome to you.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
My name is Dietmar Moltag and I'm working for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Hamburg. We are an independent institution for political education in the spirit of social democracy. And the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung is co-host of the section Veto at the Filmfest Hamburg. And although we cannot grant our award, the political film of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung this year, to any of the movies, we are very happy to present your striking film in this year's Veto section. So let's start with the Q&A. And the first question might be, it's very short. Why did you do now a film about 1992?
This film, The Year of the Discovery, is very the conception of the film is very linked to my first feature film, El Futuro, which was a film that portrayed a party of young people in 1982. Mm-hmm. And that film was like found footage, but that I decided to reenact by myself and with my crew, and that movie was about 1982 because that's the year that everybody could consider the end of the transition between the dictatorship to the democracy. It's the moment where the Labour Party won the general elections, and it's the moment that democracy is strong enough to, the population thought that democracy was going to remain in Spain. And I did this film, and I'm doing this second film because after the economical crisis that arrived to Spain mostly from 2010, I started to make films about the Spanish recent history because I had the feeling that the country had changed so much that I didn't have tools to understand this new country. So I needed to find answers or maybe find the proper questions, looking back and analyzing the ways Spanish society, the way Spanish institutions develop their economic and democratic models. So when I made that film about the 80s, the 80s in Spain have this idea of freedom, of celebration. There's the Almodóvar films, La Movida Madrileña as a cultural scene. That's a kind of, they are idealized. And I wanted to look back, not exactly criticizing, but looking at it, trying to look for the seed of the complete collapse that my generation was living in.
So you definitely did show us the time in two bright colors. It's really a film where we learn much about the crisis and about the heavy burdens that followed this crisis for the people in Cartagena in this specific film. So did you find, if you say, well, you looked from the today's perspective back in the early 90s, looking for answers of the development of Spanish society, did you find answers while shooting this film?
Always the idea of this previous film and this new film was trying to understand the present, looking back to the past, but also understanding why the present is so so hopeless. I was trying to portray Spanish society from a very different image. The institutional image of the Spanish society has to be with tourism, has to be with celebration, has to be with a lot of stereotypes. But at the same time, in the 80s, all the industrial sector was completely dismantled. And I was looking for different situations of conflict. And then I remember about the burning of the parliament in Cartagena. Yeah. And for me, it was very interesting that it happened in the same 1992, because it's like there is a major stereotype about this glory of 1992, because it symbolizes the moment when a Spanish society thinks that they are really a wealthy country, a future world economic power. but at the same time, you have people so desperate that are burning a parliament in a new democracy. I mean, so
That is something, definitely.
there was this aspect, but of course there was a personal aspect because my grandparents lived in Cartagena in the 80s, and I used to go as a child to visit them. So I had to rethink my old memories of a lucky child, son of doctors, confronting my memories with the memories of workers that were having hard times.
Well, talking about your film, we also have to talk a little bit about the technique you're using in this film. I'm not an expert, so I read that you used the high 8 technique in shooting this film, and we get the impression of old footage. It's the pictures seem older than they actually are. Because it was a technique from the early 90s. Why did you choose this technique for your film?
In the first feature film, I used 16 millimeters for the 1982. In a short films that I made in between Aliens, I used VHS-C. That was a home movie format from the 80s, and yeah, there were a lot of decisions, aesthetical decisions that were made to create in some of the first moments of the film, to create, I mean, it's difficult for the viewer at the beginning of the film knowing in which time you are, because everything looks like the 90s, even though the split screen, the place, the faces, the custom of the people. So the high 8, which is a home video from the late 80s and the early 90s, was taken to, and we used cameras from that period to create this atmosphere of an old moment. At the same time, there is a moment in the film when you realize that you are in the current time. But for me, it was important to connect with one film, 2 years, and two crises: the crisis of 1992 and the crisis of 2010, because the film is the storytelling of the social class that suffer most both crises.
One major topic your film is talking about is no doubt work, and people are talking about their working conditions, even as a 14-year-old child. They also talk about comradeship among the workers before the companies went down in the early 90s. So did you shoot a film praising the gone by working class consciousness you once had in Spain?
I have been thinking for a long time, and I wrote some articles about it, because I have the feeling that Spanish cinema didn't pay attention to some social groups from the 80s. I mean, in 1983 or 1984, the film support of the national ministry, cultural ministry, changed, and that make the cinema that has been made in Spain since the early 80s usually focus in middle class, or usually focus in literary adaptations. I mean, famous novels of the 19th century, or the Civil War, or the Franco post, or the decade of the 40s. So the Spanish cinema of the 70s was really diverse. Also in the kind of genres, there were horror films, there were documentary films, there were experimental films. But at the same time, they portrayed the working class, the villages, the rural aspects. I mean, it was a very diverse filmmaking, and I have the feeling that in the democracy, all we have, or the majority of the production was comedies of middle class in the city. So I'm very aware that that happened, and I had this compromise of trying to make a huge portrait of the living conditions of not only of these working class group, but this territory.
One last question for our talk, and this is the question which question I forgot to ask. So is there anything you'd like to add to your movie we didn't talk about so far?
For my crew, the main idea was trying to be super local. I mean, speaking about something super local.
One bar in one town.
Even though conversations about very specific aspects, like how ammonia plant works or how the fishes die because of the chemistry.
Yeah.
Or I mean, but build this collective portrait to speak about issues that I think that are happening in many countries. Because in the end, what is happening is that the present tense, the current workers that are really confused. I mean, they lost the relationship with their work, with the relationship with their unions, the relationship with with the politics, and these aspects of the end of the film, of speaking of the future of the work, or speaking of the future of the European Union, in the screenings that I made in Rotterdam, I understand that people in Europe, in Eastern Europe, or in Latin America could be interested in these aspects. But my surprise was that Korean or Japanese or Chinese audiences in Rotterdam were also very connected to the film.
We hope to see you in Hamburg soon. Thanks for today and all the best to you.
Thank you very much.